Well, hello. It is first thing in the morning, and I'm sitting right by the window in my kitchen, and I've decided I want to do some watercolor experiments. I've been walking around my neighborhood and taking pictures of different flowers and different leaves that I might want to try to paint. So, this is completely experimental. I have not practiced these designs before trying them out today. So, we're kind of along for an adventure to see what we do and do not like about these different flowers we're going to paint. And the hope is to create little flowers that I might be able to cut out and include in some collage work. So here I'm going to start with just some Piedmonite Genuine from the Daniel Smith collection of watercolors. And I want to add to that some little petals just by pressing down on my round brush. And the tip of these petals is touching the Piedmonite Genuine, so it is drawn out into the yellow just a little bit. And I think the yellow I'm using here is New Gamboge. I'm getting a little crooked with my hand. I don't want to move the paper around because it's so big, so I'm putting my hand in sort of this awkward position to try to get these petals. And this is kind of cute. I like this little guy. So this would be kind of like a yellow coneflower or orange coneflower. What's the other? Black-eyed Susan, I think, also. And here I have just some paint left over on my palette that I'm going to reactivate. It's a nice green color, sort of a mixture of a bunch of different colors over time. And I will use that to just put on a real quick stem. And I like to add a little bit of weight at the bottom of my stems. So that was a fun experiment. I wonder if I can do a second one from maybe a little bit of a different orientation. And my plan here as I paint these is to paint them first and then come in and draw over them with some either black liner like a Pigma Micron pen or with white using a Posca pen. So really these are meant to be, yes, they're flowers and later maybe even some leaves, but they're really meant to be sort of abstract, just sort of giving you the impression of, these beautiful flowers. So I'm not concerned here about every little detail being just so. Next, I found some leaves. I believe they were black walnut tree leaves, and they were, I guess, in botany, you'd call them imperipinately leaves, meaning that the leaves are paired, but there's one at the very end, right at the tip here, that isn't paired. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a go, trying to paint this sort of, a hint towards or an impression of a black walnut type leaf. And let's see, as I'm painting these guys, we're going to start out with some smaller ones, smaller paired leaves. And as we get further down the stem towards the middle, the leaves are going to get bigger. And then as we get down to the bottom of the stem, they're going to get smaller once more. So I'm going to try to keep that in mind as I'm painting. And I'm not worried about filling it all in, these leaves. I'm not necessarily worried about, like again, it's just an impression, so I'm not worried about like little details. The one thing I am thinking about is usually when I lift my brush, it leaves a little bit of a puddle. And I don't want those puddles perhaps at the very, very tip of a leaf like it is at that unpaired leaf at the very top there. So that's really the only things I'm thinking about as I'm sort of drawing in these leaves. And I love that at this point imperfection actually um, oh, did you hear my cat Gavin? Gavin's joining us today. Anyways, that's him purring. Um, anyways, imperfection, however you want to define that or think about that, is actually very helpful and adds a lot of character in these types of paintings. So I think that's it. That's my little sort of black walnut leaf. Now I could leave it just like that, but I kind of want to add some other, like little drops of other color in there just to give it a little bit more interest. So I have a blue actually. I think this is Amazonite Genuine. So it's this sort of really gentle blue that I'm just sort of dotting in along the bottom of the leaves. It's not, as you can see, it's not very dark. It's just to give a hint. And then there's that one little leaf right up top that's very inked in. This one are very painted in, whereas the other ones are just sort of like wiggly lines. So I think what I want to do with that one is lift a little bit of that paint up so it doesn't, appear so dark compared to the rest. So what I'm doing is I rinsed my brush and then dried it. And then as I press it down, it sort of lifts some of the paint that's already on the paper. There, I'm satisfied with that. Next, I recently visited a was it Lotus and Water Lily Festival. And the lotus were just so beautiful. They were this lovely pink color, and they had just such great shape and dimension. Now, I'm not quite sure, again, I'm not trying to be very, super detailed about these little paintings, and I'm not quite sure I can get like the actual shape of a lotus, but I'm going to do my best to at least maybe have an impression, and if not a lotus, at least a pretty little pink flower. So here's how I'm starting. I sort of had that center petal, and I'm adding just some little petals coming off of it to the side, a little bit to the bottom here. Now I could leave it just like that, but I kind of want some of these a little bit more connected. And I'm trying to remind myself that, remember, I'm going to come in later and, add some ink. So even if it gets a little muddied and weird now, later on, adding the ink will help to delineate these different petal shapes. So that's, I believe, Rhodonite Genuine, again from the Daniel Smith paints. All of these are Daniel Smith paints today. And I think I want a little bit of yellow because I remember seeing in some of the lotus they had this lovely yellow center. So I'm going to dab just a little bit of New Gamboge onto this flower and see if it spreads around. There's already kind of a lot of paint going on here, so I'm not sure if this will be successful or if it will just muddy it up a little bit, but we'll see. Again, it's an experiment. Let's go ahead and add on that stem. And while this one is interesting, I'm thinking to myself, I might want to try this a few more times. So I'm going to continue to paint a few more of these, but I'm going to speed up the video just a little bit for the sake of time. Next, I saw these lovely yellow flowers. They reminded me, I think, I'm not sure of the name, but they reminded me of something I think that's called something like sneezewort, or I don't remember. Something sneeze. I remember sneeze was in there. This lovely sort of native flower that's yellow, that's kind of fun and had the name sneeze in it. So I'll have to look that up and see what is the name of this flower. But I'm going to start. What I noticed is that the center of the flower, it did sort of radiate out like these yellow cone flowers we had earlier. But the center was yellow and the petals were yellow, but they were different shades of yellow. So I'm starting with sort of this rounded center using New Gamboge, and then the petals were a little bit of a lighter, brighter yellow. And while they were a little bit more narrow towards the center, they came out and almost had sort of this like jagged rectangular edge. And so I'm going to use, is it Azo Yellow, to start in the center and then sort of wiggle out. So starting in the center and then wiggle a little bit and then back to the center to make these little almost rectangular ended petals. And I like that, being that I end towards the center, that sort of little glob of paint there makes it a little bit more saturated towards the center of the flower. This is quite nice. I really like this one. It's kind of cute. I'm going to go ahead and put the stem on, and then I'll probably paint a second one and speed that up a bit. Now I'm looking at my picture of these flowers. I want to see what kinds of leaves they have. And it almost looks like it's like grassy, just these long, sort of parallel veined leaves. So I'm just going to put in some flicks of green here that just look like little bits of grass sticking up, because that's exactly what it looks like in my photo. So there we go. It's such a cute little pair of flowers. Next, I found some purple cone flower, and I don't have any orange. I don't think I want to mix orange either. So I'm going to start with sort of that center part of the cone flower with New Gamboge. I like to use that yellow. It's almost this sort of orangish yellow. I really like it. Obviously, I use it quite frequently. And then I'm going to put some Pimonite Genuine in there, and hopefully the mixture of the sort of the reddish brown and the reddish yellow will create the effect of the center of a cone flower. We'll see. And then the closest thing I have to purple would be my Rose of Ultramarine. So I'm going to get some of that out, and it's looking kind of very saturated. So I'm going to add just a little bit of water to it. I'll probably have to add more later. Oh yeah, that's coming out quite dark, but still it's a lovely little purple. And just as I did earlier, the tips of these petals are sort of touching or near to touching that center cone. Yeah, that's looking nice, but I do think the petals are a little bit too saturated, so I'm going to add just a little bit of water, and this time I'm going to start with the petals. Yeah, you can see it gets a little less saturated, a little bit more purple. That's like similar to the actual flower itself. This makes me think these are like regular coneflower, purple coneflower. I wonder what, I bet I could do like pale purple coneflower as well, where the petals are a little bit stringier. That would be a lot of fun. All right, let's get the center of this one going. Another flower I found, this one I have no idea what this flower is, so if you know what it is, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. But this one had a lot of buds that were, the stem was sort of arcing over and drooping, and the bud was drooping down. And then when the flower was blossoming, it was blossoming facing downward, and the sort of purple petals were kind of radiating out. So I'm going to start by looking at that flower that's facing downward and putting in those little sepals, the little bits that protect the flower when it's a bud, and then adding in the stems. I'm going to add in a second stem and just leave a gap before it touches the previously painted stem. And this one is going to be one of those that has a bud at the end. I think I'll add a second one as well. So on that first flower, let's go ahead and add in the petals. Now these were sort of very thin petals, and they almost look like they're like exploding out of this flower. So I'm not really giving this much thought and just letting these little lines sort of radiate out. And as you can see, that flower is facing downward, just like the one I saw when I was out on my walk. Similar to the coneflower, the petals here were not this dark. They were actually a quite light, bright purple. So again, I'm going to lift up some paint. I had cleaned off my brush and dried it. And as I put my brush down, it actually lifts some of the paint that's already there on the page, making it a little bit brighter. A little bit of a cloud has come through, so my light's a little bit dark, but you'll see that, sitting right by the window, you really will see the differentiation as clouds come and go and as the morning progresses. So I wasn't very interested in shifting this natural light. So another thing that I saw as I was taking my walk around the neighborhood was some English ivy. So I'm going to attempt, get my best attempt at drawing some English or painting some English ivy leaves, or at least, as I say, giving the impression of English ivy. Now, as I look at my picture that I took while I was on my walk, this sort of central peak was shaped differently. So I'm going to go ahead and redefine the shape here and let it be a little bit more prominent relative to the two little leaflets down at the bottom. I'll also add a little bit of paint here and there to add a little bit more depth and show off the vein structure a little bit more. So as I sort of add little details to the sky, I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video just a little bit. Another flower that I saw, and again, I have no idea the name of this one, had these beautiful orange or sort of yellow petals, and it was very clear that they had 6 differentiated petals. And these petals each had red dots on them. There was no cone in the middle. There was definitely, you could see some pistil and stamen, but they were pretty much the same color as the petals, so it was really hard almost to see them. And I think that, with the petals being so dominant, I'm going to actually skip trying to paint those sepals, or sorry, those pistil and stamen. So I'm going to put in the 6 petals sort of radiating out from the center first. Then I'm going to take some rhodonite genuine and just sort of add little dots of red. I know that at first they'll just blend out. I'll come back later and add more dots that can have a more sort of distinct shape. But this is to at least give that impression of those red dots. Go ahead and add in my stem, and then I think I'm going to do a second one of these, and I will speed it up a little bit. So those are my painting experiments for today. I'm going to let these go ahead and dry so that we can come back and add some details using a Pigma Micron pen and a white Posca pen. So everything is dry and I have my Pigma Micron pens and my Posca pen right here, and we're just going to experiment and see, what looks good. They're already kind of cute as they are, but I like adding the lines for some extra character. So I'm taking a black Pigma Micron 01, and I think we're going to start with this yellow flower here. And what I would like to do is outline the petals, outline pretty much every part. And here I'm not terribly concerned about being exact again. As a matter of fact, being wiggly, kind of like I said earlier, adds some character. So if you're gonna have some coffee, do it before you do this. It'll help you with those wiggly, jittery lines. I'm also going to decorate this very first little flower that we started with using the same technique with my Pigma Micron pen. For the second one, I'm going to go ahead and try using the Posca pen. I'm not quite sure how it's going to go, being that this flower is kind of detailed and the Posca pen might wash it out, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah, that's not my favorite. I think I prefer the technique I was using um, with the earlier flowers, but let me give it a go on these guys here. So I'm sort of doing an internal border for each petal, and the same for the stem. Yeah, I'm not really feeling the Posca pen. I think we're going to go back to the micron pens and leave it at that. For this other one, earlier I was using my Pigma Micron 01. This is an 08, so it's much thicker. And I want to see how would I like it if I just put an aura all the way around this flower. Yeah, I'm kind of not a fan of that so far. It sort of takes this delicate flower and makes it a little bit more clunky. So I'm going to go back to my 01 and see how I would feel about adding some of these internal borders to each of one of the petals. Yeah, I have to admit these two I really like, but these last three, not my favorite. So I'm going to go ahead and use my O1, and I think I'm going to be sticking to the O1, and I'm going to give it a go with this sort of black walnut-ish um, leaf here. So I learned earlier I don't like the border on the outside with an O8, but maybe with an O1 I would like a border. So I'm just going to be putting an aura or a border all the way around this leaf. In addition to putting the border all the way around, any of these spaces where there's a gap between the leaf and the petiole, I'll go ahead and border that in as well. And then I'm going to put some internal lines, sort of bordering each one of these leaves. As you can see, I'm putting like a double border and it's wonky and wiggly, and then I'm putting a line down for the stem. And I'm thinking for those spaces that are showing the gap between the leaves and the petiole, I'm going to go ahead and just add in some hatching to show that there's a little bit of a shadow there. All right, I like that. Let's move on to the English ivy. Yeah, I do think I'm going to try my O8 again, being that this one has so much saturation and color. I think having the thicker micron pen will be helpful. And I am going to go ahead and border the outside of each one of these leaves before I go ahead and add in lines to show the veins on the inside of the leaf. Oh, the sun is coming out nice and bright, casting a bit of a shadow on our artwork, but I bet we can hopefully find a position that works for us. Either way, I bet you can see or at least get an idea and an impression for what it is I'm doing. So I'm going to go back to that original technique with this lotus flower and use my O1 pigment micron to just create a border around the stem and then around each of the petals. And again, I'm being really wiggly, putting multiple wiggly borders around each petal. I really like this because, as I was saying earlier, with the paint, it sort of gets muddied together, but once you're putting in these line marks, you can sort of differentiate the different petal shapes. It gives it quite a bit of character. I think I really like this one. Now that I know I like this technique, I'm going to go ahead and use this technique with each one of the flowers that I have not yet outlined. So I'm going to go ahead, as you can see, and speed this up until I'm done doing all of my outlines. And remember, my goal was to cut these out and use them in collage. So I'll show you cutting out one of them, this little flower down here in the corner. And then I'll show you all of them as final products. Oh, this is going to be so much fun. So as I'm cutting them out, I do try to capture, a little bit of like the wiggliness of the petals. But I'm also like not super picky about this either. I don't want a ton of white space, but I do want a white border all the way around the image, so that it can, if it's in a collage, for example, it can sort of differentiate and really have hold its own space. So I'm going to go around, leaving a curvy white border all the way around the flower. I'll sort of flatten out any bends that might have occurred while I was cutting. And there we go. We have a cute little flower that could be a focal point in one of my collages. So I'm going to cut out the rest, and I'll give you a little look at what they look like in a moment. So here we go. Here's our little garden, our little collection of flowers that I've seen around my neighborhood that I can now use in collage and other artworks and maybe give to friends. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye-bye.